He wrote it all down, every gram, every temperature, every source, every symptom against every date. If the dangerous secrets hidden inside medieval royal workshops fascinate you, subscribe now. What this apothecary wrote in his preparation book will haunt you long after this story ends. My father's preparation book was the most honest thing he ever made, which is another way of saying that outside of that book, he wasn't always.
I'm not telling you this to condemn him. He was a good apothecary. He may have been the best the king ever had. I'm telling you because if you want to understand what happened in that workshop, what really happened, not the version Gobert de Mornay put in his petition to the court, then you need to understand the second column.
The year was 1370. Charles V of France had been king for 11 years, and for 4 of those years, his royal apothecary had been a 51-year-old man from the Auvergne named Renaud Vellart, my father. The apothecary's workshop occupied rooms beneath the eastern wing of the Palais Saint-Pol, low-ceilinged, stone-floored, cold except around the 3 braziers Renaud kept burning from October through March. The smell hit you at the door. Not one smell, a stack of them. Camphor over dried bog grass over the copper bite of the alembics. And underneath, something that wasn't quite a smell but more a quality of the air, the density of a room where chemical processes had been running for decades. 47 labeled jars on the east wall, 17 more on the locked shelf above, accessible only to Renaud, whose key never left his person. 2 work tables scarred with burns and crucible stains, 3 copper alembics, and near the single window, his desk, where the preparation book sat in its red leather binding, brass clasp closed, like a small locked door. Renaud's apprentice Théodore Brioul arrived before dawn and immediately began humming, the same 4-note phrase over and over. Renaud never asked him to stop. After 4 years, he'd stopped hearing it. Renaud didn't answer immediately. He was standing at his desk with the preparation book open, running one finger down a column in the fine-nibbed hand he used for official records. Dates and preparations in one column. Opposite them, in a thicker nib, notes in a more compressed, private-looking script. 2 different quill sizes, had been for years. The fine nib for Physician Royal Gobert de Mornay, the thick nib for what he actually saw.
Yes, Théodore. Use the Lombard theriac base, not last month's. And add 12 grams of the Venetian mithridate before you begin the evaporation, not after.
The compound the king received each morning was Renaud's own, reworked over 4 years to address Charles's recurring fever, digestive distress, and swelling in the joints. White hellebore extract, henbane tincture, theriac base, violet water, clove oil. It worked. The fever broke reliably. His hands loosened. He slept. For 4 years, Renaud's preparation had given Charles V something approximating daily function. Physician Royal Gobert de Mornay entered the workshop at the 2nd hour, as he always did on Tuesdays. He never crossed past the first table. The chemistry didn't interest him. He held out a sheet of parchment without coming closer.
His Majesty had a difficult night. 3 separate episodes of pain in the left hand. I want you to increase the hellebore fraction by 15% for next week's batch.
I'll review the current formula and advise.
Don't advise, prepare. I need the new batch by Thursday.
Gobert left. Renaud looked back at the preparation book, not the official column, the thick nibbed one beside it. He'd been keeping the second column for 8 months. What he was looking at now was a pattern he hadn't allowed himself to name until this moment. The king's joint symptoms improved after each administration for 3 to 4 days, then returned, slightly worse. Then the compound again. Improvement, return. A cycle. Not a random one. The return of symptoms tracked precisely to the timing of the compound. He stood at his desk for a long time. Théodore hummed. The alembic bubbled. Through the stone ceiling came the distant sound of the palace beginning its morning.
No. That would mean...
He picked up the thick-nibbed quill, wrote 3 words in the second column, crossed them out, rewrote them, closed the book. Then he went to check on Théodore's reduction and worked the rest of the day in the ordinary rhythm. Mortar, pestle, heat, distillation, record. He was very good at that part. It was the other part, where you told someone what the work revealed that had always cost him more than he wanted to pay. He went to bed with the pattern clear in his mind and his mouth still closed. The locked shelf held 17 preparations, the newest 3 months old. He hadn't shown it to anyone. The road to Sologne in January was 4 days of ox cart through frozen ruts, fog sitting low on the lowlands until midday, and inns that smelled of wet wool and bad tallow. Renaud made this journey twice a year. He'd made it 15 times. Théodore found it unpleasant in every possible way and said so openly, which Renaud found useful. The boy's complaints occupied the available silence, which Renaud didn't want to fill with his own thoughts. The Sologne marshes smelled like cold peat and the memory of summer, something green and alive pressed under ice in season. Reed beds white at the margins, the water between them black and still as a mirror laid flat on the ground. In summer, this landscape produced some of the most reliable medicinal plants in France. In winter, it produced something different. Marguerite Bette met them at the edge of Romorantin, a big-framed woman of indeterminate age, possibly 50, possibly older, who had farmed the marshes since before Renaud had started making this journey. She sold to Renaud because he paid honestly, and because, she'd once told him, he looked at plants the same way she did, like they were saying something he was still trying to translate. She had his usual order ready: dried henbane, properly stored, swamp chamomile, and the hellebore.
Last month, January harvest.
Renaud did know it. He'd known it the way craftsmen know things they haven't applied to a specific situation yet. The pharmacological principle understood in the abstract, never calculated against 2 years of winter-harvested hellebore going into the king's compound. He didn't move. Théodore was examining a dead reed at some distance. The marsh was silent except for the creak of ice settling and a distant crow. White hellebore at double alkaloid concentration, administered at a dose calculated for standard concentration, delivered twice the intended dose of the active alkaloids, the ones that, at threshold levels, affected peripheral nerve function. The king's tremors weren't age, they were hellebore. The tremors had appeared 8 months ago. The winter harvest batch had been in use for 8 months.
Yes, that is actually exactly correct.
He stood in the cold with the truth in both hands, literally holding the winter hellebore by the dried root, feeling its weight, and said nothing. Marguerite Bette watched him the way she watched her marshes, without interpretation, just attention. Renaud paid for the stock. He loaded the ox cart. They began the journey back to Paris. The return took 4 days. He spent them calculating in his head. He'd left the preparation book locked in the workshop desk. He ran the dosing figures until he was certain, then ran them again, then watched the frozen countryside and thought about Gobert's instruction. Increase the hellebore fraction by 15%. The current dose was already twice the therapeutic level. 15% more would take it to 2.3 times, into territory no careful apothecary would go. Gobert didn't know. He'd written the prescription with perfect confidence from perfect ignorance. That knowledge lived in a workshop he'd never entered, and in a woman from Sologne he'd never met. Renaud arrived back on a Thursday evening, the night before the new batch was due. He went directly to the workshop, lit the lamps. He opened the preparation book. He picked up the fine-nibbed quill and wrote the official record. Compound prepared per physician's instruction. Hellebore fraction adjusted per revised prescription. Then he set down the fine nib, picked up the thick one, and began to write what he actually knew. He wrote for almost an hour, what Marguerite Bette had told him, what the double concentration calculation yielded, what the 8-month timeline implied, what the tremors were, what they would do if the dose was increased, no drama, the way the alembic works, what goes in, what comes out. Then he closed the book, and the next morning he prepared the compound with the increased hellebore fraction Gobert had ordered, because he hadn't yet found the words or the courage to refuse. The guild hall of the Apothecaries Company stood on the Rue des Lombards with the quiet self-importance of an institution that believed itself more essential than it was. Quarterly accounting sessions were held in a vaulted room smelling of old beeswax and the particular wool and parchment smell of men who worked in offices and thought about workshops. Guildmaster Foucard presided from an elevated table. 63, never personally prepared a compound, strong opinions about how they should be prepared. He had the authority to revoke licenses, which meant the room tended toward agreement. His seal was pressed in beeswax and bore the image of Saint Cosmas, patron saint of physicians, not of apothecaries. The wrong saint for 40 years. Nobody had corrected it. Some errors become tradition simply by outlasting everyone who knew they were errors. Renaud placed his formula sheets on the table. Foucard reviewed them.
Good. My physician tells me you have something to say. Majesty, the compound I have been preparing contains white hellebore extract. The batch I have used for the past 2 years was harvested in winter temperatures. The compound has managed your fever reliably, but at this concentration, for 2 years, the hellebore alkaloids cause deterioration. How long have you known this?
Renaud held the guildmaster's gaze for exactly the length of time required to seem untroubled.
I have been recording my observations for 8 months.
Foucard made a note. The seal was pressed. The quarterly accounting concluded in 40 minutes. Renaud collected his sheets and walked back through the cold streets to the Palais Saint-Pol. If you want to know what's in that second column, what Renaud wrote when he thought no one was looking, when there was no official record and no guild seal and no Gobert de Mornay to perform for, subscribe to this channel if you haven't. The stories worth finding are always the ones that got written in a different hand, on a different page, by someone who couldn't help being honest when the audience was just themselves. We'll keep bringing them to you.
Baseline support.
Back at the workshop, Theodore had completed the new batch, humming through the entire process while the alembic reduced and the compound cooled, and Renaud's careful formula produced more of the thing that was making the king worse. Renaud checked the batch. Correct temperature, correct color, correct viscosity, correctly wrong in every way that mattered. He opened the preparation book, added to the second column another notation updating the clinical prediction for the hand trimmers at the new dosage level. This compound at this level will produce this effect in this time frame. No drama, just chemistry. He didn't notice Adelise behind him until she said his name. She'd been his assistant for 2 years. 23, steady-handed, quick to understand process. She'd started reading his reference texts 3 months ago. He'd found her doing it and hadn't stopped her, which was as close as he came to encouragement. Renaud closed the book, not quickly, deliberately. Then he turned.
The archives are nearly complete.
And so the knowledge continues.
He thought no one would read this. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a few things. But he was a very good apothecary. Subscribe, Brain, and we'll keep finding what they buried.
He looked at his daughter. She looked back with the expression she'd had since she was 7, waiting, not pushing, but absolutely not going away.
These observations on hellebore's concentration by season should be regarded as standard.
It was exceptional. Extraordinary, even.
A pause.
Still the same tune, Theodore?
Some things stay the same, Adelise. The shelf is open to you now.
I know. I understand the weight of this.
Renaud stood up. He walked to the lock shelf. He touched the lock. Didn't open it, just rested his fingertips on the cold iron. 17 preparations. The newest, 3 months old. He hadn't told anyone. He didn't answer her question. She didn't ask it again. She stood at the work table a long moment after he'd gone to check on Theodore and looked at the preparation book. She didn't open it that night. She opened it 3 days later, before Theodore arrived. She read for almost 2 hours, the fine-nibbed column and the thick-nibbed column side by side. By the time she'd finished, her hands were very still on the table, and she was staring at nothing with the expression of someone who has understood something they'd been told, in some indirect way, for months. The same week, the king's attendant sent word to Gobert de Mornay. The hand tremors had spread to both wrists, and there was a new symptom. The king's vision, in lamplight, was sometimes doubled. Doubled vision. In the medical knowledge of 1370, it was a sign of advancing disease or age. In Renaud's second column, it was listed under predicted symptoms at current dosage level, continued administration. He'd predicted it 2 months ago, and told no one. The summons from Gobert de Mornay arrived on a Tuesday in February. It was not a request. The king's hand trimmers had lasted 4 hours, long enough to prevent Charles from signing documents. Gobert's message was brief. Explain why the king was worse despite the increased hellebore fraction. It was a remarkable question, if you knew what Renaud knew. Théodore was preparing the morning reduction when Renaud came back into the workshop with the message still in his hand. Théodore looked up. He stopped humming. That was the loudest sound in the workshop in 4 years.
I'm going to the physician's office. Keep going. But Théodore, use the summer batch henbane, not the January stock. The January stock runs high. Write that in the log.
It was the most direct thing he'd said about the stocks in 8 months. Théodore wrote it down without asking why. Gobert demanded a higher dose, something that would show visible results within 3 days. Renaud said no. Just that. He looked at Gobert across the office and said the word he hadn't been able to say for 8 months. The silence in Gobert's office was a different kind of silence than the workshop silences Renaud was used to. This one had edges. Gobert looked at him with the expression of a man who has suspected something for months and has been hoping very hard that someone else would deal with it. Renaud had not expected that. Gobert led him to the sick room, salted poultices and warm wool, and the staleness of rooms where windows aren't opened. Charles V was propped on cushions, thin-framed, alert in the way very intelligent people are alert even when unwell.
Calculations are as requested, Good Master.
Very well. Bring forth the seal.
As you command.
Renaud clasped his hands behind his back. His hands were the steadiest things in the room. He stopped, started again.
It is our responsibility now. Use wisely.
Renaud considered lying. He recognized it the way he recognized subtherapeutic temperatures, by the way it felt in the moment before you did it. The king looked at him for a long time. Charles turned to Gobert. Gobert did not speak. Gobert de Mornay was removed as physician royal 11 days later. Renaud did not lose his position. The king was pragmatic, but correctness, in a court that had been comfortable, reads as accusation. Within 9 months, Renaud Vellart's appointment concluded. He left Paris in November of 1370. He took the preparation book. He also left a copy. Adelise made it. She copied both columns and kept it in the workshop archives without asking permission. He didn't stop her. Charles V lived another 10 years. His tremors improved after the hellebore was withdrawn. By spring, his hands were steady enough to sign documents. He died in 1380, a swift illness. He was 42. The preparation book was referenced by apothecaries at the Palais Saint-Pol for 60 years. The second column was copied into the permanent records in 1384. With a marginal note, these observations on Helleborus niger concentration by season should be regarded as standard. The author was Renaud Vellart, Apotheca Royale until 1370. He wrote this and did not tell anyone. Did not tell anyone. Technically correct, but not quite complete. My father told everyone. He just told them in the only language he fully trusted. He told the preparation book, and the preparation book is not afraid of the second column. Not in time to spare those 2 lost years. That part doesn't get reclaimed, but the knowledge was there in the second column, in ink that outlasted everyone who wrote or read it. In the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale, in a collection of medieval pharmaceutical documents not fully studied, there is a preparation book in red leather with a water stain shaped like a diamond on the lower right corner. 2 columns, a fine nibbed hand in one, a different hand in the other. My father wrote it all down, every gram, every temperature, everything he knew and everything he feared. The preparation book was the most honest thing he ever made. He just didn't know that was enough.